Okay, so as I was just saying, welcome everybody. I'll introduce myself a second time, I guess. My name is Kyle Sholey and I work in Planning and Development Services with Smoky Lake County. I will start sharing my screen again. I believe everybody can see now the title page. Ed, are you able to give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Okay, that's a thumbs up. Awesome, thank you. I'll let it populate here. So the purpose of tonight is very much a listening session. As I mentioned, this session is being recorded and it'll be posted to YouTube most likely tomorrow for those who aren't in attendance tonight. Tonight's topic of discussion is centered around how Smoky Lake County deals with recreational vehicles at our lake lots. And this is something that every year gets quite a bit of discussion. And so therefore, County Council thought it wise to conduct kind of a public participation opportunity to hear from the public about some of the things that are working well and some of the things that are not working as well. And basically, as an outcome of this exercise, there'll be a What We Heard report that comes forward to Council, which will include any of the comments made this evening, as well as summarize the survey that we've had posted for a couple weeks now. And so, yeah, I'll get started into our agenda here by just providing an overview of how the session will flow. I hope to do less talking rather than more talking, so I'll try to keep it short and sweet wherever I can. Basically, we'll go through the current situation under the land use bylaw, some case studies that Smoky Lake County is looking at as far as how other jurisdictions manage recreational vehicles. Some of the ideas that have kind of been bouncing around. None of the proposals here have come forward yet in the form of bylaw amendments, so they are just ideas at this point. I'll just highlight the fact that, again, we've got that survey that's open until the 23rd. So the end of next week, if I'm not mistaken. I'll just pop into my calendar. Yeah, the end of next week. And then the next steps and process that could unfold if we receive direction from Council that they want to see some changes, and how that would play out, and also what your opportunities are to directly inform that, because this is not the only opportunity that you're going to have. So without further ado, basically, as I just already said, Smoky Lake County has a number of lake communities specifically, and some things are working well and some things are working less well when it comes to the treatment of RVs. There are a variety of lot sizes and types at our various lake communities, and we know, because we hear every so often, that folks either want to see fewer RVs allowed or more RVs in certain circumstances. And then as well, enforcement of the existing rules. There's some challenges around that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But the provisions that we're dealing with here fall primarily under the land use bylaw. So Smoky Lake County adopted its land use bylaw, the current version, in 2014. It has a number of relevant sections that deal with different aspects of land use. There's quite a few components that mention recreational uses and recreational vehicles, and we're not talking about those sections specifically tonight. So I've listed some of those irrelevant sections here. We're not talking about regulating actual proper campgrounds. What we're talking about and contemplating here has everything to do with on private lots and how those get treated. So the relevant section in question is section 7.25, recreational vehicles. And as you see here, I've highlighted the current language stipulates that the year-round placement of up to 2 recreational vehicles are permitted without a development permit. That means you don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to, jump through any red tape. That is your right. It goes on to say in part 2 that additional, so 3 or more recreational vehicles, and I note here that it doesn't specify how many more, but more than 2 can be permitted for maximum period of 4 consecutive days. And so certainly in interpretation of that section, there's discussion about, well, what constitutes 4 days and what does that mean? Does that mean that if I've had 3 RVs on my lot, that I can take one of them, drive it around the block, and then park it again? And that's kind of part of the question of, does that, the language is a little loose there, and I think we can all agree that it can be bent in either direction to suit whoever is trying to understand that section. So, and then thirdly, this section also mentions that no recreational vehicle shall be permanently connected to any utility or municipal service such as power, gas, water supply, or sanitary sewage disposal facilities unless the recreational vehicle is located in an approved recreational vehicle park. So that again is not a situation where a private landowner has brought their RV into their lot, and that's not what we're talking about here. So continuing on, so also some, somebody just arrived, I'll let them in. There we go. Some relevant definitions under the bylaw. In particular, I'll draw your attention to 214 and 215, which specify what it is that we're referring to when we refer to a recreational vehicle. These definitions were fairly recently updated in 2021, but it's relevant to understand specifically what it is we're talking about. So I can tell you at this point that this is an ongoing conversation. Basically, this is not a new conversation, and I know county councillors receive feedback, especially following the first long weekend of the year and then each weekend after that, about things that are working and not working. So we have been already looking abroad to other jurisdictions to draw inspiration from in terms of what we could do better. I've noted just a few of them here, and again, they handle each aspect of lake life a little differently. So I'll get into a little bit about what some possibilities could include. So for example, as I mentioned, currently our RV provisions are within the land use bylaw. Some other municipalities we've noted have a standalone RV bylaw, and for a number of reasons legislatively that would, assist in enforcement of the existing rules, which I know we've heard from time to time has been an issue. As well, the extension of this 4-day consecutive limit for additional RVs could be better tracked. So in this case, we might be looking at something like a license or a development permit. Again, that's just an idea, and certainly from administration's perspective, that represents quite a bit more work, and I'm not perfectly convinced that that's very feasible. And then again, that also draws the question of, would said permits be free, or would there be a cost associated there? And I don't know the answer to that yet. Thirdly, differentiating between occupied and unoccupied RVs, because of course, some of the time you'll have an unoccupied RV that you store, but you're not actively residing in or using. And I think that's a slightly different use. Thirdly, or fourthly, I should say, consideration of requiring a dwelling unit to have been constructed on the lot already prior to locating of an RV, including on a permanent basis. So for various reasons, that could be an attractive option that the council may wish to look at. And lastly, on this slide, perhaps building into the provisions a little bit more consideration for lot size. So for example, I know there's a number of lots at Mons Lake that are considerably beyond your typical, 2-acre lot. And in those cases, for example, it might make sense to have a bit of subjectivity to whether or not the site is suitable to having more RVs or not. And again, these are, I want to really stress to those here or watching in the future that these are just some possibilities that we've either gleaned from other municipalities and or has come up in conversation with council, but none of these things have come forward yet. This is very much a listening opportunity for us, because we need to fully and clearly understand the problems in order to take any steps to remedy. So continuing on, you may already know, and hopefully you'll have already completed the survey. We've got 3 surveys open right now, certainly pertaining to RVs, but also pertaining to dark skies and allowing of chickens in the hamlets. Those surveys are open until the 23rd, and I can tell you that we've received probably at this point close to 60 responses pertaining to RVs. I expect that number to continue to grow. And some of the real value that I've been seeing so far in that is not even necessarily the multiple choice answers, although that's been very interesting, but the written comments there are really insightful. So I thank everybody here who's already completed that. As I've mentioned a few times, basically the What We Heard report will come forward to council for consideration. Coming out of that What We Heard report, we'll ask for direction. You know, if we hear that there's a consensus on, you know, improving some aspect of how RVs are treated, it could be that a land use bylaw amendment would come forward. Council may also choose to do nothing, but if an amendment were to come forward, basically that would be another opportunity for the public to have their say. How that will work would be that a public hearing would be scheduled. So rather than talking with me in an open house necessarily, although we may also choose to do another open house in the future, council would hear from you directly at the public hearing. And then after the public hearing, they would give consideration as to what they've heard, and they would either choose to adopt the bylaw or not. This is just kind of a timeline continuum pointing out that we've had the same bylaw now for you know, a number of years, coming up on not quite 10 years, but a number of years. And it has been amended from time to time. You'll see there that it's been amended 9 times as recently as January of this year. And what the possible next steps might be. So again, I've kind of tried to keep to my word and have a very short presentation for you, because I'll be curious if there are any questions that I could try answering for you at this time. You know, my contact is up on the screen here, as is my boss, Jordan Rug. He had the audacity to have a birthday today, so that's where he is. So that's our credentials, and do feel free to reach out to us even if you don't speak or ask a question in the chat box tonight. We remain available to you, and we're happy to chat with you, of course. That's basically it. I'll just run through a few ground rules here. If there are questions that I could try to answer for you, that you may either type them into the chat box if you're a little bit mic shy, or unmute yourself and I'll call on you to speak. Please remember to be concise so that we can get through as many questions as possible, and as well as to be polite, because I think this issue of RVs at lake lots is a little bit contentious, and I know there are some strong feelings in the direction of to regulate it or to do less regulating of it. And again, that your comments are being recorded, so to be mindful of that. So that's that. I'll end the screen sharing. There we go. And I'll maybe open it up to the floor. If there's specific questions or comments, now's your time. Hopefully, I've given you enough to be thinking about, and I want to really stress again that this is early days, early stage, and that no bylaw amendments are likely to come forward. Well, they quite simply couldn't come forward before the fall. Mr. Basarab, I see you've unmuted. Did you have a comment you'd like to make?
Yes. Can you tell us how St. Paul, Lac La Biche, and maybe Two Hills, how they deal with the RVs?
I can speak a little bit to that, and to be perfectly honest with you, Jordan has been the one that's been looking through the bylaws, and I know he'll be watching this session later when he has a chance. But so, for example, some of the management issues, I think, at the lakes actually are also outside of the RVs themselves, but also deal with things like encroachments on the environmental reserve in the lake. I know, for example, Lac-La-Biche County had embarked on adopting an environmental reserve bylaw, and that had been stalled, and I believe still is stalled, hasn't proceeded with. And actually, we had done the same thing. We've got a draft environmental reserve bylaw that received first reading, but hasn't moved forward yet. Um, Basically, uh, it does appear to be the trend that RVs are handled outside of the land use bylaw specifically. And I can speak a little bit about why that might be. Under the land use bylaw and legislatively, um, the development authority or the designated officer is the one that is able to enforce the land use bylaw. And so, number one, it's very difficult for development authority to, you know, uh, be doing the number of site inspections that are required to create a case. So in the event of where we would normally like to issue a ticket, we don't always have that option under the land use bylaw. And I guess furthermore, um, it's fine and dandy to have, again, the 4-day consecutive rule, but again, the question of, if I pull it around the block, does that reset the clock and now I have another 4 more days? Or, you know, to be even more of a devil's advocate, um, you know, I didn't see you move the RV around the block, so that's even more up to I guess interpretation and subjectivity. So um, I can't speak as detailed as I'd like to add as to things like um, the number of RVs that are allowed in these given cases, and I can certainly follow up with you subsequently to that end, because I know that Jordan's been pulling that information together already. But you know, I think it's safe to say that we're trying to thread the needle a little bit as far as allowing people, you know, the use and enjoyment of their lot that they visit either, you know, one weekend a year or more than that perhaps, and you know, being too Wild West as well. You know, things under the land use bylaw, um, like noise, that's better handled under the noise bylaw, for example. And you know, things like setbacks from property line, again, that's really tough to enforce under the land use bylaw. So, you know, the municipalities that I referred to there on that ninth slide or so, or eighth slide, I guess, um, you know, we've got that information and we're currently trying to wrap our brains around it and understand it and synthesize something that's applicable to our circumstances. But I'll follow up with you subsequently on that, Ed.
But do you know what Lac-La-Biche does, or St. Paul or Two Hills, what they, how many units they permit on a lot right now?
Uh, no, off the top of my head, I don't have that for you, and I'm sorry. That would have been a really useful table to have here. I admit to you. So, um, what I'll do is I will pull that into a table, and I won't be able to do it for this evening, unfortunately. But I'll circulate that to you, and I'll also have it updated on the public participation page of the website. Does that work for you, Ed?
It would be nice to know what other jurisdictions allow, and is it, if they have a half-acre lot or 1-acre lot, is it the same, or do the rules change as you get smaller or larger? And has there been any, with having more units on a lot, has there been more complaints? Because allowing it is one thing, but what, you know, have they had much complaints because now they've got 4 units all year round, or whatever the number is?
I think that's a very helpful comment. Yeah, and certainly, you know, that's a possibility. And certainly as well, how those complaints are handled, I think, is also relevant in that, you know, what's the service level as far as site visits from the you know, enforcement, bylaw enforcement, and how is that handled also. So, I mean, there's a lot to consider here, and certainly, I don't think anybody has their bylaw perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect one size fits all bylaw, but you know, these portions of the bylaw are quite old, and I think could stand to be clarified, I think, for some people, perhaps. Um, Ms. McGinnis, did you have a comment that you wish to add as well?
Sure, thanks. I was just wondering when the last area structure plan was done. I'm assuming one was done for Ed's new subdivision. And a few things that multiple trailers, when you say 725 and then you listed three things, you said 2 year round. Is that even if a person has a single family dwelling, which this is all zoned out here, a single family dwelling, and then they maybe have a garage that they let people sleep in, and then are they still allowed to have two trailers? Is that how that reads?
That's a great question, and the answer is basically yes. Given the current language, our interpretation is that if there is already a dwelling and even perhaps a garage suite, as you refer to, that there's nothing in the bylaw that prevents them from then also having the 2 year-round recreational vehicles, which is obviously quite an intense placement on a standard lot size, right? So, I mean, there's a number of permitted and discretionary uses allowed at the lake lots, as you'll know. But to answer your question, that part of the question, the answer is yes. I can also confirm that the Bonnie Lake Area Structure Plan was adopted in 2007, and that was that area structure plan still is in effect. So that area structure plan deals with the entirety of Bonnie Lake. It's certainly a lot newer than some of our area structure plans. I know, I mean, we've got plans still on the books from, for example, Goodfish in 1986, for goodness sake. And Hanmore is not much better than that. So some of these high-level planning documents, I think we can all agree, are due to be revisited and updated to current standards. And that's something that Jordan and I have been talking about for a number of months and years already, that boy, wouldn't it sure be nice to get that looked at and updated. But to answer that part of your question, those are the years relevant there.
Okay. And I did have just a couple more things.
Please.
Just environmentally, for the trailers that, you know, they have decks around them or whatever, are you allowing gray water onto the ground? Is that, I mean, is that an acceptable practice?
Another good question. So basically, at the municipal level, we've got the Development Authority, and then things like safety codes, building codes, fire, electrical, gas, septic, are established by the province, basically. So how that works is that Smoky Lake County retains an accredited corporation to conduct our safety code inspections. And so in the case of septic, there's a permit required for septic systems. And although I'm not I'm not a septic inspector, so I couldn't speak to you about the specifics of the code. I can tell you that generally speaking, a open discharge on a residential lake lot is not going to be looked upon with much favor. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. Basically, in an agricultural setting, you can have a pump out or a discharge system where it's not going to egress onto adjacent lots or have an impact on bodies of water. Those are some of the considerations that I know the septic inspector looks at. So, again, if you know of cases where you've got concerns, certainly we have had in the past, even in the last year, not at a lake lot per se, but actually elsewhere, had the inspector come out and have a look and actually issue an order to remedy a situation that had gone awry. So the short answer is basically no. That's not, doesn't sound above board to me.
Okay, but how it is managed is by complaints from neighbors or what? Like,
Yeah,
you guys don't do annual inspection or, curious.
Yeah, fair enough. And basically the answer is yes. We don't go around. I mean, we don't even, for tax purposes, inspect annually. It's kind of every 5 years that the tax inspector is, the assessor is what the word I was looking for, gets around to the different portions of the county. But yeah, if we receive a complaint at this office, we then place a call to our inspections group, and they can investigate. That is basically how we handle these things, and it's worked even in the last year where you know, a situation came up that, you know, their septic system had failed and was now causing, you know, noticeable harm, and has subsequently had to be remedied.
Right. Okay, I'm not sure that that went right to my question about people just running a hose and putting
Oh.
gray water on the ground. Like, that doesn't get inspected with a tax inspection.
Right, sorry, I can try to be a little clearer. So, yeah, if we receive a
It's okay.
complaint about somebody dropping a hose and that's a problem. And so we would specifically go and inspect that. We would have our inspections group inspect that, and if required, issue an order to fix that. And that would be on an as a complaint basis, that we wouldn't wait 5 years to look at that. And you're right, that was a poor example to refer to the assessor. I brought that up to
That's okay.
point out that we don't get everywhere all the time.
Right. And when was the last time that type of stuff was inspected? You said you do it every 5 years.
Yeah, and so that was for assessment purposes. We don't have, you know, the safety codes inspector inspecting everywhere, basically ever. Basically, when the inspection happens is at the time of construction. And then again, if there's any, you know, additional work that happens after that, or if there's an issue of some kind like what we're talking about here.
Okay, so it's twigged with the development permit, basically,
Correct.
right? Okay.
That's exactly.
Okay, I got that. Then one more, sorry, what?
Oh, I just said that's exactly right. I think we've got a bit of a lag too.
Okay, okay. So then just one more thing, and that would come to the parking. You know, with additional trailers, the ditches are, you know, getting full. I mean, that's county property, and that's up to you if you want to allow that. I don't think right now it's allowed, but that's something that should be either allowed or not allowed.
Mhm.
I mean, that should be amended in the bylaw as well, depending on how the bylaw goes, as far as more RVs.
I tend to agree with you, and you know, it's not currently allowed now that people should be camping in the ditches or recreating in the ditches, quite frankly. There's all sorts of, you know, traffic safety and the like that becomes a concern for us, and definitely if there are those cases, we want to hear about it. You know, some of the time the problem becomes that we hear about it Monday morning, but by Monday morning it's already too late and they've either vacated or what have you. So I hear you loud and clear when it comes to having to do a better job of you know, enforcing the existing rules. You know, and since we're kind of talking a little bit about encroaching, you know, it boggles my mind sometimes when I look at an aerial photo of a given area and I see all these constructions having been undertaken that very clearly were well beyond the property line. Either there's, you know, sheds or garages or houses even that straddle the lot line or even way beyond. And it'll be a big undertaking to now get caught up with that, because people, I think, in some cases genuinely believe that their property goes beyond where it does. And they, you know, have thought that it was theirs for 20 years and nobody's ever told them otherwise. So I can't blame people for that. You know, one action that we're taking to hopefully help remedy that sort of thing is hopefully installing here this summer or fall signage at the lake lots, which will have basically an area map and point out, here are the private lots, here are the environmental reserve, you know, and hopefully that begins to help a little bit with awareness. Yeah, and as I mentioned, that's hopefully to occur this year still. We're just refining the design on that a little bit and hopefully to bring that forward. But yeah, you stumbled onto a big topic, which is encroachments beyond the property line. And if we were to have all of the lots or lakes rather surveyed to identify all these encroachments. That's an expensive undertaking as well. But it's a question of, do you continue to let it slip and slide, or do you start to try to educate and enforce a little bit too? So I appreciate that question.
Okay, I'm done for now. Thanks.
Fair enough. Maybe something will trigger you, and you'll come up with more stuff, which would be welcome too. But I'll go back to Mr. Ed if he's got something further.
I like what Marilyn brought up earlier on the parking in the ditches, and I think that probably only pertains to Bonnie Lake resorts, because I think the other subdivisions don't have that quality of road or ditch to them. So I think that's probably more of a problem in Bonnie Lake than in, say, Birchland or some of the others, which they don't have any ditches or the ability to park. So that's a good thing to put into your consideration for your bylaw. But I go back to the occupancy. You have a house, and I do believe you're permitted a number of accessory buildings, and those can be used as dwellings. So you have a permanent house, and you maybe have 2 or 3 accessory buildings that are all used as a dwelling. And now, so you've got a house and 3 accessory, that's 4. And then you got 2 permanent trailers that you can park. So you're now up to 6. There should be a limit on the number of, if you have a permanent house and accessory buildings and RVs. If you have, something along those lines, I think needs to be thought of. And I think Marilyn brought that up, and I'm just expanding on it now.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, Mr. Ed Basaraba. And I would highlight basically that under the permitted and discretionary uses under the R1 district, that guest house or in-law suite is a discretionary use. So that means that someone who applies for that permit wouldn't necessarily get it. It would be dependent on a number of factors, like if the site was found by the Municipal Planning Commission to be appropriate for that level of intensity, and if parking has been properly handled and that sort of thing. Again, I know that in some cases people just go ahead and build a guest house without obtaining the proper permits, and that's its own problem. And I think as those cases get reported to us, we conduct an investigation, and if necessary, issue a stop order under the Act to say, look, you needed to get a permit for this, and you can't be doing this without permission. And you need to basically take some steps, or else face sanctions. Let me just scroll a little bit here to see how it's handled under the R2 district. And basically in a very similar way in the R1 and the R2 district, actually, that these are discretionary uses. And so what that means basically, for those who don't know, is that if a use is identified as being a permitted use, basically you will get a permit if you apply for it. You still need to get a permit, but you will get it if you apply for it, and it complies with the rest of the bylaw. In the case of a discretionary use, it's actually not the Development Authority Officer, Jordan, who's making that decision. It's actually the Municipal Planning Commission. And so that's made up of 5 people, which just so happen to be council. And they look at the merits of a given development application and try to really ensure that the conditions attached to a permit are sufficient to address any issues that arise in the future. And that the site is in fact appropriate for that use. And so then I guess the other part of it being a discretionary use is that also an application for discretionary use can be appealed either by the applicant if they're approved or denied, but they're approved but they don't like a certain condition on their permit, they could appeal, or if they were denied, or if a permit is approved but a neighbor contests that, they can also appeal that and make the case that this would be an inappropriate use. So yeah, it's not that guest houses and in-law suites are straight up allowed, because they're not. They're supposed to be, I don't want to say restricted, but I guess the word I'm looking for is more thoughtful than just, yeah, everybody gets a guest house, because I think most people can agree that if, as Ed just pointed out, if everybody's got, you know, two guest house and two RVs and blah, 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 the intensity, the number of dwelling units on that lot, all of a sudden you're well beyond what was ever intended there. So does that help a little bit?
How are you handling currently? You have someone who's built a garage and he lives in the garage, and then maybe there's two or three accessory buildings that they live in. So now you've got maybe four dwelling units on the property. How are you handling that? And then they're going to have two more permanent RVs on the lot. How are you handling that now?
So I'm guessing that in the case that you're referring to, this site didn't obtain permits.
Correct.
Basically, if they haven't obtained permits, we investigate upon hearing of a complaint, because again, we don't have X-ray vision. We can't see into from space into people's buildings and determine, what's going on if there are more than one dwelling unit. But if we receive a complaint, we do an investigation. And if we determine that there is in fact a contravention of the land use bylaw, we start by drawing attention to that site, letting them know that, look, you're not compliant with the bylaw and it's a problem for these reasons, and you need to take X, Y, and Z steps to remedy it, or else we're going to enforce this. So that starts first of all with a phone call, and then second of all with a letter, and then third of all with an order. In that order, because under the Municipal Government Act, the municipality has to act so fair. I think I can phrase it like this: we have to be so fair to somebody that it's almost unreasonably fair before we're actually able to go and give an order that says, you must do this by such and such date, or we'll do it for you. That's extremely rare. And short of getting in front of court to have a court order, that's something that's very difficult to do. So we prefer, and it's cheaper, and it's better, quite frankly, to work with people to help them understand and to help them be compliant, as opposed to going in guns blazing, because that will very quickly be deemed unreasonable by a judge, and we'll get our wrist slapped as a municipality that we're not being reasonable. So in the cases where it's really obvious that there's a contravention, they're fully aware that there's a contravention, they don't care, it's kind of almost daring the county to do something about it. It's frustrating, because I would very much like to jump to a stop order, but it's a process that unfolds on the scale of months, not weeks. And we, again, can't do anything if we're not receiving information. We also can't, and I'll mention this as well, we can't go on a verbal complaint. We do rely on a written complaint, because we do need a basis off of which to operate. So, I think perhaps the county can look at doing a better job of communicating what it is we need from people, and that would be perhaps helpful in these cases. But that's generally the process, Ed. It's not quick and easy, and perhaps rightly so, because we live in a free society, and we need to, again, thread the needle on what's reasonable. But it starts with a phone call, it escalates to a letter, and then it escalates to a stop order.
I wanted to ask Marilyn, do you see that happening in our subdivision a little bit?
Marilyn, I think you're still on mute. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Ed. Do you mean that somebody complains and we finally get to a stop order happening in our community?
Where someone builds a garage, and then he builds a little lean-to, and then another, and then all of a sudden you've got 3 or 4 accessory building that people live in.
Yeah, there's one really good example of that. And I won't name numbers here, but
Thank you.
you know, by and large, the people that I consider overusing their properties are, by and large, are very clean and neat and respective and quiet at 11 o'clock at night, and they do all the right things. And last year was an awesome year because this lake was finally getting used, and there was a ton of kids around here, and it was great to see. But I do think the county has to nip something in the bud, because people do take advantage. Yeah.
It isn't,
Yeah.
how do I say it, widespread, but there is some that do take advantage.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think if others are prone to do that and they look around and they see that happening and then they just go, well, he can, I must be able to.
yeah,
So
exactly.
that's what I mean, just getting to, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Unless the county takes some action, they'll continue to do what they're doing. So the county needs to take a proactive
Exactly.
approach.
I appreciate that. And I think,
Well, this is a good start.
go ahead.
Sorry.
That's all right.
No, I spoke.
Okay. Well, you'll get, don't let me shut you down, but all I was going to add to that is that basically for the reasons that I've kind of tried to get at, because under the land use bylaw, we've got a very rigorous process of how it has to get from phone call to stop order. That's not quick. So in those cases, it does kind of make sense perhaps to have a standalone community standards bylaw and a standalone RV bylaw, under which it's much quicker and much easier to issue tickets. It's again not perfect. Justice is imperfect, but in terms of, you know, if the county were to increase the level of service for enforcement of these rules that currently exist, that would be perhaps an opportunity to make it a little easier, make it a little quicker, and a little bit more, I guess, tactical and flexible. Because, you know, as it's currently written, it's pretty easy to wiggle out of an enforcement action, given the language that currently exists in terms of timelines and numbers and even compliance with the density stipulations, which we've circled around a few times this evening. So that's kind of part of the thinking so far. You know, there's a number of others here who haven't spoken yet, so I just want to really make the case that if you do wish to make a comment or push back on something, that all you have to do, I'm trying to have an eagle eye here and unmute yourself if you wish to jump in, but yeah. And short of seeing anybody, I guess. Yeah, so it's, I appreciate that we received direction, I guess, at this point to begin this conversation in a public way. It's kind of tough to know specifically until we've got something that I can show you to poke holes through. But it's also important to start conversations soon enough, basically. So as I mentioned, comments we've been receiving already are very insightful. Hopefully, as we pull that all together, it'll give us a picture of the direction that we need to look. If and when an actual change is proposed, that will be publicized and advertised and circulated. And in all likelihood, I would suggest that we'll have another one of these conversations to talk specifics. We're not quite there yet. And I know some were asking for specifics, and I'll try to give you some information here in the coming days in terms of you know, density units in other jurisdictions. But I appreciate those of you who have taken some time this evening to listen or to comment. Please share on social media if you would. The invite to the survey. We need as many responses to that as possible, because that'll give council further information that this is something that people take seriously. And you know, the fact that we've had 60 some responses so far already is indicating that to me. But are there any other questions? We're still just a little shy of the hour, so I don't want to shut us down prematurely. Go ahead.
Thanks. I just thought of one other thing, and it's kind of the county is shorting themselves by allowing, you know, all of these transitory dwellings on a property that they don't get to tax. And the land use is being used, but you're not getting the taxes for keeping up the roads or the garbage or the whatever. Just, that's the only point I wanted to make. I'm sure you guys are thinking of that.
It's right on the front of the mind of several councillors, I can assure you. So yeah, certainly the conversation around implementing a minimum tax has bubbled up a few times, and certainly I'm not the right one to really speak about that because I'm not the expert as far as how that would exactly look or work, nor is it necessarily the solution to that problem that you just highlighted, but very much, you know, that's part of the sensitivity around all this is exactly that point that for a temporary mobile structure like that, the county doesn't see a cent. And, you know, more than one lake lot, put it this way, more than one lake lot has never seen any development on it for decades, and likely won't going forward either. So what I can report to this group, which is a little bit of positive news, is that we have seen a number of county-owned lots in, for example, some of the hamlets start to sell, which is really neat because some of those county-owned lots and some of the hamlets have been, you know, we haven't seen taxes on that for 20 years, and so now it's, you know, it's not gonna make us rich, but it's good to see that there's an increased interest in living in rural Alberta and Northeast Alberta, and I think there's a lot of really good positives that'll come of that in the coming months and years. But that was a good note to throw in there, Marilyn. Ed.
Back to this one where you've got a dwelling and then 2 or 3 accessory buildings that they live in, and then they bring trailers. It makes it difficult, you know, if you've got to put this in writing, the complaint, then all of a sudden you're the policeman for the area and you get painted with the, you know, he's a squealer or she's a squealer or whatever. It makes it difficult that the community have got to put it in writing. I mean, the county have got to take some responsibility. Somebody has to take some responsibility and go and do a visual and see, hey, something is wrong here. There's a dwelling and then 2 or 3 accessory buildings. Was there permits issued for that? And it shouldn't be up to the residences to be the policeman and be painted with a policeman attitude or policeman job or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have bylaw services that's supposed to be their role, and I hear loud and clear what you're saying about not wanting to create enemies or you know, cause undue friction in the community, and I guess what I could offer you, Ed, is you know, it's tough, right? Like I fully acknowledge that. From the county's perspective, there just simply aren't enough of us to get out often enough and inspect everything often enough to do it by ourselves. So I think basically what we're talking about is working together. I think, you know, maybe that's what I can offer you at this point is that I'm not saying that it's not any one buddy's job. Community is made stronger when county administration and community members can communicate regularly and properly and have those lines of communication open. So yeah, I appreciate the comment that you made. Oh, and there's just somebody joining us here a bit late, but I'll let them in anyway. And if I speak, I think it's going to echo. Oh, maybe not. I see somebody on the phone ending in 7 6433 just unmuted. Did you have a comment you want to make?
No, this is possibly us, Dave McKinney. We just had a problem unmuting ourselves.
You're unmuted now.
So, okay. I just appreciate Marilyn and Ed's comments, because those were the comments I would have brought up too. With how do we get this stuff enforced? Like, I don't want to be the police at the lake. And we have like half-acre lots at Mons Lake with 4 trailers. And it has been brought up to the county's attention, and nothing seems to be done. I'm sorry if I'm not very clear.
Do you happen to be on speakerphone? Maybe if you took yourself off speakerphone, we'd get less feedback.
Okay, we're not technical.
That's all right. Okay.
We
But
might be lost.
I did basically hear what you said, and you know, I appreciate you speaking up and lending your voice to some of the comments that were already made. Yeah, again, I think when it comes to the more than 2 RV units, as it's currently written, that's really difficult to enforce. So I think it's probably prudent to look at some changes in language there. So I'm going to just put you back on mute, and then I'll unmute you again, because you're echoing a bit. So that's, I think that'll be perhaps one step forward to address that loophole with as far as, you know, again, personally, I would argue that the language currently is wide open, right? Like it's really tough to enforce the existing language, and it has been for now, 9 years. So that's tough. And I think we've been circling around the fact that we need to give ourselves the tools to do better enforcement. How it's been probably isn't good enough. And so hopefully by doing something with this bylaw, we'll be able to do a better job. I'll try to unmute you again in case you wanted to follow up. Perhaps not. And I feel badly for having muted you, but we were having difficulty hearing one another, so I apologize. I think it's, I wish I could remember off the top of my head. I think it's *96 if I'm not mistaken. Or perhaps you said your piece, and that's also a possibility. So again, I'll look around the room a little bit. If there's any additional thoughts or comments that you want to make sure get captured, go ahead, Ed.
Can we do the survey again now that we've come up with some different ideas?
Yeah, go ahead and do that. If you have other ideas that you want to jot down in an email, I'll drop my email here in the chat for everybody. SmokyLakeCounty.ab.ca. I can be reached at kscholey, which is KSCHOLE at SmokyLakeCounty.ab.ca. Or give me a call as well, 780-656-3730. And I'd love to hear more from you. And as I keep saying, the conversation has been ongoing and will be ongoing here for a number of months still before we have something concrete, some proposal in front of you to poke holes at and try to improve and work on. But already this conversation is kind of providing some good direction about some of the considerations that we need to make. And so I really appreciate everybody's taking their time to listen in and to comment. Share the survey, give me a call, and we will go from there. I'll end the recording. We're just coming up on 6 o'clock now, so I'll end the recording. And for the purpose of the recording, have a great night, everybody.